Hello and welcome to Melomaniax, the podcast where we take unbiased deep dives into the biggest musicians and bands of all time. I'm Ashton.
And I'm Dallas, and today we are going back to the Summer of Love, the era with Creedence, Clearwater Revival, and so many other bands. But today, we're talking about CCR. But before we dive in, please don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on our socials. We're on Instagram and TikTok. And make sure to drop us with a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, although we appreciate it on Apple and Spotify in particular. Also, the Patreon is live. We offer one single $5 a month tier. It's going to get you access to a lot of cool perks. We wanted to keep that pretty simple for you guys. So join that if that is something that interests you. So today's tale takes place in California, and I'm going to let Ashton kick us off from there.
Yep. California, which blew my mind as well as yours, I believe, because I came into this episode not knowing anything about the band CCR other than just their music, and specifically just their hits, which they have a lot of. But I always just assumed after hearing the vocals that they were from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, somewhere down in like a southern swamp state. But nope, they're actually all from California, which was shocking. Specifically El Cerrito. I believe that Cerrito, California. It's almost like a suburb of San Francisco. It's just across the bay. And so Doug Clifford met Stu Cooks in 7th grade. Both kids showed up to school in classic greaser outfits, you know, the denim jeans, the white t-shirt, the black leather jacket. It was just kind of the look back then, especially after James Dean. And Stu and Doug instantly found common interest over their record collections and their similar interest on the radio. They both specifically loved like the R&B soul stations that would come on during the day, and apparently at night, if you got the dial just right, you could get a country station that had stuff like Johnny Cash and Hank Williams. So right then and there, that automatically kind of painted a picture for me with like early CCR sound, like with the like soul R&B side with that like country twang mixed in there. Mm-hmm. So right off the bat, I was like, well, this makes sense. So Stu had played a little trumpet in school and took piano lessons, classical training piano lessons. And Doug messed around on piano, but always had a love for drums. And his very first kit that he actually put together was, I think he got an old marching band bass drum from a neighbor. And then he got an old snare drum from another neighbor. He put together a hi-hat stand in his welding class in school. And then he just put like a flower pot, turned it over and put the snare on that. And so his drum set was just like, I think he got like he always historically was one of the ones that used 18-inch cymbals as his hi-hats. He didn't use the proper hi-hats. He put 2 like crash cymbals together, but I believe he put 2 horrible cymbals together. So he just had hi-hat, kick, and snare. And it was the most janky looking kit you'd have ever seen, but it was enough. I think he even had his buddy who was in a carpentry class make him some homemade drumsticks over there. But regardless, that was enough for the two of them to sit and listen to the radio and attempt to recreate the sounds that were coming out. The two bonded mainly over artists like Little Richard, Elvis, Fats Domino. They also bonded over the fact that they were born 12 hours apart, which is cool. Doug, Stu, and John, all 3 were born in 1945, so that kind of makes it easy. 3 of the members all the same age all the time going
12
forward.
Hours apart's crazy.
Yeah, that's super close. They were born on different days. I think it was like the 24th and 25th, but within 12 hours is really awesome.
Yeah, that's crazy. So it was actually a Little Richard song and then a Fats Domino song that Doug heard one day while leaving the school gym. And he followed the sound of the piano, and it led him directly to a shy 14-year-old John Fogerty. And Doug asked him if he wanted to be in a band, and thus the Blue Velvet were born. What do we think about the name The Blue Velvet?
Blue Velvet, one of their better ones that they'll have along their way before CCR.
I think it'd be cooler if it was just Blue Velvet, the Blue Velvet kind of. I think
it might have been.
In that case, actually ruins it.
I think it is Blue Velvet. I might have wrote that wrong. I don't think it's the Blue Velvet. It's just
Blue Velvet is a little bit better. I like that.
I think it is. Yeah, the Blue Velvet, but they don't include the. It was just Blue Velvet.
Okay, fair enough. Like Eagles.
Yeah,
Everyone
Eagles.
just adds the.
Because it's so awkward, I guess, to say. Just
Yeah,
like
I'm a huge fan of Eagles.
I'm a
Like
huge fan of
the
Eagles.
bird? What?
The bird? Yeah, I was gonna say what?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of a hawk guy, I guess.
Yeah.
But thanks for. I was
That's
talking about music, but that's cool.
That's why you have to add the in front of it. But as
Yeah.
far as merch, you don't have to. So that's where it's cool.
True.
But
true.
in sentences and talking, you kind of have to add the in front of certain band names.
That's very true. You have to do it yourself. So the thing that these three boys had in common was that all their favorite musicians were black. They loved the soul, R&B, and jazz coming from black culture in particular. And they thought they, were the best musicians in the industry. So they wanted to kind of mold their sound after that, like James Brown, Chuck Berry, that kind of stuff. So John would sit next to the record player and he learned to play the tunes just straight out of his old out-of-tune piano. And even though Doug originally heard John on piano, guitar was John's dream, as we all know now. Yeah. So John got most of his music taste from the records of his older brothers, Tom and Jim, and the ones that they brought home. That's most people's story, I think.
Right? It's always just like the family influence on the records.
Uh-huh. So John focused on the instrumentalist and the organization of the arrangement, while his brother Tom would always focus more on the singers. So Tom would actually later become part of the band, but as of right now, it's just the trio.
Yep. So, little background on the three. Doug grew up in like typical middle class home. So the way they kind of explained it, because of I'm not super familiar with California, but I do know some of the layout. And in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's like these hills that border up against a national park. And so apparently just the higher up on the hill you lived, the higher class you were. So like the more expensive houses would be at the very top because they had a really good view over the bay and just everything. So Doug lived like halfway up the hill. It is kind of how like the description was. And his house actually was the first to get a TV on their road, but he was like basically just straight middle class. His mom used to sing and I believe it said she had a song on the local radio. I don't know what it was specifically, but she stopped her artistic career after she had Doug and his brother. So that's kind of his musical background. Stu, on the other hand, grew up with a little bit of money. It's so funny because I see like a little bit of each person in you, specifically with your story. So Stu actually grew up, his father owned a law firm and was a lawyer, and that actually included the Oakland Raiders on his client list. So he was not doing so bad, himself. But his father actually put himself through college by playing playing trumpet in a jazz band before he busted his lip playing rugby and was unable to continue playing the trumpet. And his mom was like one of those people that just did all kinds of artistic talents. Like she sang, played piano, did actual like painting and whatnot, just art all across the place. So him being a musician was kind of allowed, but it was always his future to take over the firm. It was always going to be, he was going to go to school, go to college, take over the firm. That was just always the future. They didn't really care what he did in the meantime. And that was actually his plan for quite a while, but then we know how that ends up. And then we have John, who definitely came from the least of the three. He was one of 5 kids left to his mom after his father left. And his bedroom was actually in the basement. During the summer months, his room would flood and he would just like constantly have a couple of inches of water on the floor in his room. So this kind of helped drive John to have much higher ambition and work ethic than the others. Even though everybody always worked hard, John's just specifically coming from a lot less than the others, felt like he had way more to make up for. Yeah. Way more to prove, way more to, So that always kind of stuck with John. And the others kind of knew it, but not to the fullest because they usually practiced at either Doug or Stu's house, not typically at John's. So. Yeah,
that stuff's, I think as we get older, that stuff means less, but you forget when you're a kid that that's almost like your whole world. Like, if you have less than someone else, you just feel so much, so inferior, even though it's not really reality. It's kind of in your brain that way, Sometimes, depending on, how shitty people are, you could definitely be teased for it and stuff. But even if not, you could still feel inferior, even though everyone else might not even think that. It's just you,
Yeah, for sure. But regardless of the three different upbringings, they all had the exact same goal as musicians, that they wanted to hear their music on the radio and make records.
Nice.
So
Well, they knocked that goal out of the park because I think every day to this day, 2024, try to go an hour on a classic rock station without hearing Fortunate Son at least 4 times, right?
Dude, I can't wait to talk about that song in the future or when we get to it. That one's funny because of its origins, but we'll continue talking about these teenagers for a bit. 3
teenage kids meeting up daily to practice playing cover songs of their favorites.
Has that been you before?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's still me, probably. Doug and Stu knew how to make noise, as they put it, in quotes. But they said John actually had a real talent for organizing everything and actually making them sound good as a group. So already that attention he paid to arrangement and things like that early on is helping him stand apart and helping them stand apart. So the boys had dreams and aspirations of being on the radio and putting out records. Doug even told Stu and John one practice that, here's a quote, "Someday we're going to make $100 a night." With adjusting for inflation, that's like $200,000 a night these days. So I'm joking. It's not that much. And as John and Stu sat and considered what they thought was impossible, Doug then topped it off with each.
I love that. The painting of that scenario.
They're sitting cross-legged looking up at him like, oh,
whoa.
So, each?
Each?
That's not possible. So the boys all took on random jobs to help keep their equipment upgraded and top-notch. So Doug finally replaced that flower pot with a real snare stand, and John and his brother Tom teamed up to buy an electric guitar. So now these boys are finally getting somewhere. So they started playing shows for their junior high school before moving on to playing at high school events. They even landed a residency on Fridays, playing for a local hangout joint. They were a house band. Nice.
Yep.
And they were making $5 each per performance, $95 to go, not bad, which was more than Doug was making, for allowance money. So
that actually earned the respect of his dad quite a bit.
They're trending up.
Yep. Trending up in I think 8th grade at this time or something like that. It's junior high school. So, but not long into their playing, John wanted to have his older brother Tom sit in on their practices. So by this time, they were kind of coming into high school, and Tom was, I believe, 4 years older. So he had basically was just graduating high school. And so, of course, like when Tom shows up to the practice, Stu and Doug were blown away. Like in walks this really cool 18-year-old who's tall, handsome, could sing well. It had, just like had records, had been to LA. So like previously Tom had tried to be a singer for a band, and that band drug him out to LA to try and do some recording, but then they kind of didn't want to put in the work. And Tom was like, well, you're not going to be successful if you don't want to work for it. So he went back and still wanted to have a career in music somehow, even though he was graduating high school and was getting married and was taking on a full-time position. He still had that dream of not being a blue-collar worker and doing music. But so he took notice on John's band because of John himself and his work ethic towards their music. And he was like, I'll see what's here. So between the two, they got Tom to show up to their practice, and Tom wanted to get a record deal with the Blue Velvet because he thought they had the potential. And so through this, they actually caught the attention of singer James Powell, who needed a backing band to help him cut 2 songs, Beverly Angel and Lydia. And even though the songs were doo-wop and not their preferred genre, they were absolutely gushed over the opportunity because they were like, oh my gosh, this black singer they want us as his backing band. That's awesome. And they're all 15 at this time. So that's also really, really cool. So they were over there like, oh my gosh, we got to take this opportunity and run with it. And the song Beverly Angel actually got a good bit of local radio play. It didn't sell too well, but it did get the name out. So they were already kind of, it wasn't their song, but it was still really cool to hear them playing on the radio. You know what I mean?
Right.
Even as just a backing band.
Again, trending up. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a really cool experience for them.
Yeah. So that brings us to them moving into high school. So he started playing high school assemblies and all that kind of stuff. John grabbed an overnight job at a gas station to be able to continue to buy guitar strings. And he also picked up his first tape deck so he could start recording his own demos. So John taught himself the basics of mixing while listening to records in his basement. He would turn different parts of the music up and others down and listen to each group isolated and individually. Meanwhile, Doug was playing with the band part-time and was on the high school football team for the other part of his time. So his parents finally gave him the ultimatum: it's football or music. And without hesitation, Doug no longer played football. This was actually shocking to his parents because he was a pretty good athlete, but they still supported his music making by helping him tote his drums to shows and letting the band practice at their place, all the stuff musical parents do. Tom, by this point, was actually married and had a full-time job with an electric company. But Tom was determined to help the Blue Velvet by running demos of them all around town. So he's still in it as well. And he's sending demos to radio stations as well as recording companies. And if anything, he was kind of their acting promoter and manager. Makes sense being the oldest and all too.
Yeah, I couldn't quite figure out. So I know I do believe he was doing lead vocals at this time, but I also think vocals were split between him and John because Tom couldn't always make the shows. But Tom was at this time they were like Tom was a really good singer, but he had like a really good like high pitched voice, like falsetto and stuff. Mm-hmm. So and John was apparently did some singing, but John's always been a little more shy. So I do believe Tom would be, quote, like the lead singer at this point. But there's no like specific details on who was doing it. Pretty soon after, though, with the after getting into high school, they started landing frat parties as gigs. So it's funny because in junior high, they're playing high school shows, and then in high school, they're playing college shows. So always a little step up. But they were plainly playing at UC Berkeley, and they were still getting about $20 a show. Tom joined when he could, but if not, the trio would still go out there and kill it. And sometimes the college kids would pay them in a combination of money and beer. And Doug and Stu both kind of did like this early Uber thing where they would just go up to the college and basically drive the drunk college kids around for money or booze, just as like Uber before Uber. And then they would then show up at their high school parties as heroes because they had money and booze, But John was never into the party scene like the other two were. He rarely took any time for leisure, to be honest. Both of his parents having drinking problems and splitting kind of scared John away from alcohol. And the one time John did decide to take a swig literally was like worst timing, and a cop walked in like right as like he's normally not the one to ever drink underage or any of that. And like the one time they're like, come on, John, like have a sip. He takes a cop walks in and sees him. So that solidified
only him. Yeah,
only him. So that like for sure solidified that he wasn't going to be getting involved with that too much. So that makes sense because John would just rather make music. That was his shit. And rock and roll was like a new genre hitting the Bay at this point in time. And John wanted to find a studio that produced rock music specifically. And he located one in town that had just opened. He reached out to the owner, Bob DeSosa. And Bob was taken back by a kid who just, this teenage kid who just wanted to come by after school or when he wasn't working, and all he wanted to do was just play guitar and mess around with the recording equipment to learn it. And he could see like the drive and talent that John had, and so he allowed him to go and start learning his ways around the producing world, as you'd say
for
it,
sure.
Because that ends up being like John is the primary for all of CCR's sound. He writes a song, produces them, everything goes through John.
So that brings us to May of 1962. A song would come out by Booker T and the MGs, Green Onions. This is a classic. I love this song. You love this song just as much as CCR does, right?
Oh, yeah. I love this song.
Yeah, I remember. It's been a while since I've heard it, but I definitely like this one as well. It's a jazz-inspired instrumental. And where'd you first hear this one?
I first heard this one, dude. It was a VHS commercial. You remember when you put your VHS movies in, like you get like 3 or 4 previews, and then your movie would automatically start. Yep. Yeah. So it was during one of these previews for the movie Sandlot that the song Green Onions plays in the background on the through the preview. So the preview
was for Sandlot, the movie?
Yeah. But the song playing was Green Onions. And I just remember always liking that song as a kid. And then one day I looked it up as an adult. And it stuck with me.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, the CCR boys were also blown away by this song. And so Booker T and the MGs immediately became their idols. So they started playing Green Onions live
Oh, yeah.
pretty much immediately after that came out. So again, that was May of 1962. So that became kind of a staple of their set through the rest of 62.
Yeah, the book claimed that the song Green Onions was their North Star, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So as we transition into 1963, things were looking unsure for the Blue Velvet, because Stu would be for sure headed to college to continue working, towards taking over the firm. Doug's parents had split, leaving Doug alone, and I think if I remember correctly, it was like junior year of high school that his parents split, and he was kind of left to fend for himself. A friend of the band's took him in for a little bit. And then Doug started drinking a lot more because of the parents splitting. John was facing the same future as brother Tom was, getting married, working a blue-collar job to survive, but nobody wanted to give up on music. That was always still the main thing, how can we live our lives, continue to do our music? And so Stu and Doug both went about an hour away from El Cerrito to San Jose State. Stu went because of, law school, and Doug went because he had nowhere else to go. So he got a job and was doing part-time school up there. And the band was still meeting up every weekend to play gigs, but they just weren't getting their daily practice in. And then also around this time, the boys were kind of struggling to figure out what to play, because rock and roll had taken like a hiatus because Elvis was shipped off to Germany with the military. Little Richard kind of converted to a religious artist. Chuck Berry had just been arrested. Jerry Lee Lewis was spurned for statutory incest, so I guess he was arrested as well. And then Buddy Holly, Big Bopper, and Richie Valens all died in a plane crash. So the biggest rock stars were kind of just not around for a couple years. That is until February 9th, 1964, when the whole nation watched the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. And my goodness, could you imagine the day after? So they were talking about that airing, and that specific day the Beatles played, there was no underage crime in the U.S. that day because they were all at home watching TV. So
wow,
funny.
That's crazy.
Dude, so funny. But anyways, so the mold had been set. Basically, at this point, the Beatles hit the stage, and it's so annoying. I know you and I aren't big Beatles fans, so maybe it's more annoying to us. But God, the Beatles hit the scene, and then every band had to be the Beatles, basically, for a couple of years, or you weren't going to find any success.
Today.
Yeah, you still see. So
it's not as obvious because everything's more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like divided up into smaller pieces. Like, I don't know. There's like, then it was the Beatles. Now it's like, rock, hip hop, metal, country, all these different things. Then it was less like there isn't really so much one artist anymore. There's like 5 or 6 different ones that are the head of their categories, and
that makes
everything
sense.
Just got more divided.
But the Beatles were the top of pop, rock.
Beatles were the one.
Everything.
Like,
they were the
everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. So anyways, the mold had been set, and so the band realized they had to make some changes. Stu needed to go from piano to bass. Tom would have to step away from vocals and play rhythm, and John would take over lead duties as well as vocals. So they had to have this, every band had to be like a quartet, basically. And then, from like left to right on stage, everyone would be equal. And so they had to adopt this. However, I do want to mention that one thing about their performing, John was always very shy. So he kind of sits off by the drums. And anytime he would sing, he would not face the crowd. He would kind of like face towards, he would kind of like half face the crowd, half not. And then any solo, he would immediately turn a 180 and just face the drums and play a solo. So he was like super shy front man as well.
Even like through all of it, or just the beginning?
Through all of it. He always was kind of, they eventually got to the point where, he was up there playing the solos and stuff, but he always did not connect intimately with the crowd while singing. That's just been a thing that always was a John Fogerty thing. Probably not now in his age. I haven't watched any of his recent shows, but I assume it's fine now. But back then, it's just like you could just see the shadow of this guy off in the corner singing. That was kind of
Yep.
what they got known for.
So around this time, Tom and John watched a show on TV called Anatomy of a Hit. And on the second episode, they saw the works of Fantasy Records, who were just across the bay from them. And the label was co-managed and co-owned by brothers Soul and Max Weiss. And they got into the recording business through plastics. That's an interesting way in. But back then, you could become a record company even if you just had the in with the vinyl business. So, I mean, I feel like in a way everything was easier back then.
Right? No, yeah, you can't do that now.
You could just trip and fall and all of a sudden be one of the biggest rock stars of all time. It's like, oh shit, I didn't even.
Oops. I fell on that guitar. I didn't even write that.
I actually bumped into a guy. He owned the music business, so he gave me a deal right there on the spot. It's like,
owned
what?
the music business. I love that.
That doesn't exist anymore. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, man, it would have been great to be one of the 4 bands.
Right?
So anyway, the Fogertys brought in some music and the label liked what they heard, but they wanted lyrics. The band also wanted to change their name to one word, like the Beatles, right? So after a quick discussion, Blue Velvet became The Visions. All right, whatever.
Yeah, definitely a downgrade, but
don't love it.
Yeah,
we'll keep working on it. So John started truly working on his vocals around this time. He was really going after the kind of gritty, howling vocals reminiscent of James Brown and Little Richard. And he was essentially trying to recreate this kind of Southern blackness soul within himself. And he knew the origins of this music was from black slave and church traditions. And he was definitely not the only white boy attempting to recreate the blues and soul coming from black artists. A lot of people were, especially Elvis and others. Yep. It was really around this time that started the trend of tons of young white kids wanting to adopt black culture. And we still really see this trend to this day, especially in like hip hop and rap and stuff like that.
Yeah, so
at that time it was really big in soul, R&B, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then with all that in mind, we have to take into consideration it was 1964, and that was like 2 big movements were starting. You had the civil rights movement going huge in America, not so much in California, but specifically throughout the southern states. You know what I mean? So like with King and Malcolm X and all those guys, a lot of their fighting took place on the East Coast in a lot of southern cities. California, as I learned reading this book, has been pretty liberal for a long time, especially around these late 60s in California. So even though they weren't really directly in any of the things that were going on, they heard about it in the news. It was national coverage, and then a lot of college kids and young teenagers, the hippies, I guess I'll say, started their movements and did a lot of stuff in California, and a lot of kids were moving over, joining the Peace Corps, all kinds of stuff like that. So that was one movement. The other movement was the anti-war movement, because the U.S. had just started engaging with Vietnam, and that the Vietnam War, I guess, started. Which also, here's a little history thing. I had never really looked into the Vietnam War, and so it talked about it a little bit in the book I was reading on CCR. Uh-huh. I didn't know that. So basically what happened was, like, I'll call it a terrorist group, but a group within Vietnam killed the newly elected leaders of Vietnam. And so then I read that and I was like, huh. And I turned to my wife and I was like, what did that have to do with America? And she goes, nothing, absolutely nothing. And I was like, oh, so we really did just send people over there and get involved into something that literally had zero to do with us. And
no, it was worse than that even. So do you know the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
No.
I'm not overly familiar with the incident itself, but it's the incident that it's got us into Vietnam, and it was a false flag. We basically set it up ourselves so we could have an excuse to come back and be like, oh, hey, everyone, this happened. We got to go to Vietnam. And everyone will be like, okay. But it turned out, came out later that it was actually a false flag set up by the government, our own government.
Yeah, there was basically what I learned is Vietnam, or that whole conflict, really was just the biggest waste of human life, resources, and time. That's an embarrassing mark on American history, is what I really learned. But that was just sad that we go to war for no reason. And that's what I couldn't figure out is America. Well, we say no reason. usually behind most of the wars and stuff is some kind of business decision. Yeah. But I can't find out what the hell business there is in Vietnam for America to be involved in. The Middle East has oil. That makes sense. There's, hidden motives.
But it's not
there.
even that. It's if you are an airplane manufacturer manufacturing fighter jets and all of a sudden we're not in war, well, you just lost a whole lot of money. So you're going to figure out something else to do real quick to get us back into war. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I thought about that. And war can be it can make a lot of money because we made a lot of money. It was a great boom in business. Both world wars were in America. So it is very possible that the government was like, maybe if we just go to war again, we can boost our economy. But Vietnam did not boost the economy whatsoever.
No. People were starting to kind of wise up to it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That one backfired, which, goodness gracious, can you imagine making that decision? We could make more money if we just go send off 200,000 of the low class, because they were specifically targeting poor whites and blacks to, from the lowest classes who they were just sending in boatloads over to Vietnam. So they were killing off the low class and attempting to boost their economy with a false war. All kinds of bad. So it makes sense.
Yeah, it's crazy because if you took out the governments so they weren't a part of it, and just you walked up to someone from Vietnam at that time, like if you could somehow get through the language barrier, I bet you'd get along. You'd be fine.
Right?
Why do I hate you? I don't have anything against you. I don't know you.
Yeah. So anyways,
why are we shooting each other? Yeah, it's crazy.
That was just like, so it makes a lot more sense for the rising up and revolting with the hippie era towards the government and why people are starting to stand up to the government. It just makes a lot more sense to me now with a little bit more history context thrown in there.
And all of this kind of combines to play a big part in John Fogerty developing the sound that becomes the sound of CCR. So one of my old music teachers used to always say, music isn't created in a vacuum. So we tend to go back in history and hear a song. We're like, oh, okay, cool. But you got to remember what was going on in the time of the world that song was created. Mm-hmm. And everything we just talked about is that we're showing that music is not created in a vacuum. So while Doug and Stu were busy at college, John actually played with another band for about a month up in Portland, but he kind of missed his buddies. So he returned back to the Bay and got back with the Visions. Ugh. Do you remember Fantasy Records? We talked about them a couple minutes ago. Well, they put together all the demos that Tom and John presented and released them on a record under the name The Gollywogs, which a moment of silence for that, which may take the number one slot for worst band name, The Gollywogs.
Yep.
Although when you think about it, the Beatles is also pretty bad.
Real quick, if you want to know what gollywogs are, which just makes it even worse. The gollywogs is named after a famous like UK doll that was like this little doll that had like a black face and stuff on it. So like it's this little racist doll from the UK is what they named their band after. A band that is trying to recreate the black culture sound, like literally trying to recreate black music, and you give them a racist name to start. Like, was
this like a famous doll at the time that like everyone knew? It was
a famous doll. It was a famous doll over there. They literally changed their name because they were trying to appeal to all of the Beatles fans in the UK. That was the only reason for this name change, and it was their manager. At the time, they were being managed by Max, one of the two brothers that owned Fantasy Records. So it was his decision alone for everything.
What?
Yeah.
Well, that's stupid. And they got new band uniforms as well. Beatles shoes, plaid bell-bottom golf pants, long sleeve, purple paisley trim shirts, dark green vests. This is I don't even have to see this. This is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life.
Oh,
it's like you played Mad Libs with articles of clothing.
Dude, right?
And the band was fine with this, but they absolutely hated the hats they had to wear. It was a white Cossack style hat that was towered in white fur.
So,
dude,
to paint the picture, you know the like Russian style fuzzy hat? It was one of those. Yeah. It's one of those, but all white.
Oh my god.
And they said they were absolutely, first of all, they were hideous, but also they were like, wearing it on stage. Yep. Wearing it on stage was just like you were doomed to sweat your ass off before you even put the hat on. just looking at the hat, you started dripping sweat.
It blows my mind. A lot of things about this blow my mind. One, that people back then, like 40s, 50s, 60s, they were like really submissive. You ever thought about that? Like if like the government said something or like boss said something, it was always just like, okay. Where nowadays it's like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't care who you are.
People question authority now.
Yeah. Where it's like if any manager was like, well, dude, you got to wear this, I'd be like, I'm not fucking wearing that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're not gonna be famous. That's fine. I'm not wearing that.
Right. That was the whole idea was just like, which sucks, is the manager's pure decisions was he's gollywogs after some kind of British thing, and then he wanted, because the Beatles had it uniform, but their uniform made sense.
Was nice.
Yeah, it was all
just
black
like
suits.
a suit, basically.
Yeah, it was all black suits. That's good.
That's timeless.
Yeah,
that's timeless. That doesn't look bad now.
The worst
now,
part,
their hair, we could discuss that, but
the worst part for me was the I didn't put it in here, but the plaid pants they had was a plaid that was every color. It was like a rainbow plaid. Yeah, just a like. I don't know why, but I could see AC/DC wearing that.
Do you know what this reminds me of? You'll remember this. You were over one time and we had a gig, my old band, and we were at my bass player's house, and he came down and we were like, dude, you got to go wear something that you'd wear to a rock show. He's like, oh, okay, hold on. And he goes back upstairs. Do you remember what he came downstairs in the second time?
I'm trying. I
don't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically what you just described.
Yeah.
It was just like insane plaid pants, like a stupid shirt. Finally, I think my singer's girlfriend was like, I'll go help him. I just remember he came down the stairs looking like, is this good? And we all looked at each other and just bust out laughing.
What was it? Was it a drummer? I feel like it's always.
It was my old bass player.
Player, you said. Oh, okay.
Yeah, at the big house in 5 Points.
I was like, I feel like notoriously when I look at bands, the drummer is always the one that either has no sense of fashion or tries way too hard to look different from the others.
Yeah, it's like, dude, you're sitting.
You're sitting on the drum set. You already look different from everyone else. You're good.
You could wear boxers the whole show. No one would know. Like,
right?
Anyway, so they hated the name, hated the attire, but they didn't have a choice. That's the part that kills me. They didn't have a choice.
Yep.
So anyway, moving on.
Yeah. Their manager was booking gigs. They had put together a record. So who were they to, really talk back at that point? They were doing mini tours around California in a 58 Volkswagen bus that Doug bought, so he did most of the driving. And the gigs were at like bowling alleys, skating rinks. They eventually upgraded to playing in front of military bases and in front of newly drafted soldiers. So that became a big thing with some of the I can't remember the base that was there, but they would get hired on to play like the night before, like people would be sent off to Nam. So they would be like the last band they'd hear before getting sent off to war.
Jeez.
And
what do you even say between songs at that point? Like, good evening, guys. Like,
right? And
jeez.
Little did the band know it was, well, I say little, but they knew they were going to have to be dealing with the draft themselves. So,
right.
Tom was safe from the draft because he was married, had a kid, full-time job, and he was a little on the older side of the target age group. Stu was also safe because he was enrolled full-time in college and had asthma. So that was enough to get him deferred. However, Doug and John were of the age, and neither one was attending college full-time, so they were prime suspects. And they finally got their letters of draft. So Doug decided to join the U.S. Coast Guard Reserves, and specifically so he wouldn't get sent to Nam, he joined the football team, which apparently makes you an important asset for playing the other military branches. So being on the football team actually prevents you from being eligible for getting actually sent over to the war.
So much weird politics.
Dude, so weird. Yeah. It was so funny. There was specifically Doug with his football. Because he was playing football and was really good, he was able to work out a deal for him to keep his mustache and sideburns for their music gigs outside of the military.
That's crazy.
They ended up getting mad at him and making him shave anyways. But on the other side, we had John, who was struggling to find any recruitment center that had any spaces left, and his wife actually finally ended up finding one with the U.S. Army Reserves. And in order for him to get pardoned, he did a lot of not eating. I think it was quite a few days, to the point that like he was losing so much weight, and they sent him to doctors, and they eventually wrote him off as like mentally unstable because of it. But really, it was just all, you know, kind of like what we talked about with the Doobie Brothers, just like do whatever you can to not get, you know, drafted or sent to war. So he ended up also getting pardoned because of the eating disorder.
It's interesting because at the time, you know, you would have gotten a lot of shit for that being a draft dodger, all these negative connotation names and stuff.
Yeah.
But then, you know, in retrospect, looking back at how things played out, it's like, well, why would I go sign up to die in a war that just benefits others? It makes no sense. It's not a country, like, it's not a proud of the country thing. Like, if there was something that came up that was like, let's defend the country, it's like, yeah, sure. But this was not that. And so that's a little bit different.
We're not defending anything. Although America,
we're just going over here to make a bunch of guys
America
money.
Labels it. We're defending freedom. Well, we have freedom in America. I'm not sure how much policing we should do for freedom in other places. Like I love
somebody
to
did
help
the math,
other people,
dude.
but Jesus.
So the money. This is a little off topic, but the money they sent to Ukraine, somebody did the math, and if we had just divided that up, just gave the money to citizens in the U.S., every person would have had like $200,000 or something. Every single person in the United States. It was actually, I think, more than that. I think it was $200,000 a year. No, I can't remember what it was, but it was like some like, wait, what? like imagine what they could have done with these, you know, inner cities and areas that need this money to grow and, you know, stop the cycle of crime and drugs and all that stuff. But instead, it just all goes overseas.
Yep. Well, we're already locked into the cycle. You know what I mean?
Crazy.
So we're already in cuffs, but that is crazy. Anyways,
yeah.
In the meantime, some local bands from the Bay Area were starting to lay down some influences. So groups like Moby Grape, if we remember those guys, Quicksilver Messenger Service,
absolutely terrible,
right? Jefferson Airplane, or some other, all these being like the San Francisco Bay Area. We're all pushing the rock and roll sound. Even stuff like the Grateful Dead, another California band out of that area. They were already pretty big at that point, I believe. But specifically, these other local bands were really starting to set like really deep rock and roll sound in the area. But anyways, while doing their military service, the band was still meeting regularly, playing gigs when they could. And they even wrote their first song that would appear on a Creedence Clearwater Revival album, Walking on the Water. And the song was actually written by Tom and John, and is one of the only songs that would be included that has more than just John in the writing process. So going forward, almost everything would be purely John. But they put that together, and they wrote another single called Porterville, which would fail the chart. And this would also show up on the first CCR album, but they were singles under the name Gollywog at the time. So, and you can go find the Gollywogs. It's like 23 demo recorded songs on iTunes. So that ended up getting released, and I went and listened to it. It's interesting. It's actually not super bad. It's like John before he fully developed his rasp. So like, it's just like before he really perfected his vocals. So it sounds like him, but not exactly like CCR. Very interesting album. But
nice. Well, there we go. By this time, John was doing all the producing and writing, right?
Yep. 100%.
100%. That brings us to 1966. So Tom is now 26 years old and felt like he was running out of time to make his musical dreams come true, which we actually know is not true. Yeah. Like, you're never too old for it, or really too young. He knew that John and Doug could be called away to war at any second, and he needed to make something happen. So he had about, $1,250 saved up from his job, and he called for a band meeting. They hosted this meeting at the house that Doug and Stu lived in, and they had named it the Shire because of how much they love Tolkien. That's fun. They even painted elvish lettering on the mailbox. That's next level nerd right there.
Right.
So Tom wanted to get serious about their opportunities and put all of his savings into the band. Stu also made the decision to drop out of high school, or not high school, but just school in general, and not follow in the footsteps of his father. That's a big decision there. So he sold his 1966 Chevelle that his dad bought him and added the money to Tom's 1250. Here we go. They're starting to get it going here. Tom quit his job as his coworkers teased him, "See you on Ed Sullivan." And the money they put together would basically pay everyone an allowance per week to live off of so they could be full-time with their music. That is so baller. Tom handled the money and bookings. John handled all the sound and recording, other than the drums. And he had to constantly challenge Doug to help him. Funny story, after basic training, Doug had put on more muscle from working out and playing football, and in turn started playing too fast and constantly off tempo. And eventually he got it back together. But
I find that so funny.
Just like, he's just like a roided up, like,
just playing.
It's like a gorilla back there.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. How would the effects of, like, because they weren't getting to play every single day, I was like, how would the effects of like gaining that muscle, so your normal like stroke is like different? It would feel different. You know what I mean? Yeah, I actually feel like that would play into like starting to play too fast. You're like, well, this is new. This
too
is
hard or something. Yeah.
Yeah, just a little. I definitely would see it affecting your play until you got it like back under control.
Yeah.
So anyways, we're moving along to 1967. The band got a call from Saul Zantz, who was the sales manager at Fantasy Records, and he told the band he just bought Fantasy Records. John was happy because he had looked up to Saul as basically a father figure. John had been working with Saul in the studio, even not just on CCR stuff, just kind of like as a, he was his mentor in the studio. So he had learned so much from him and just really idolized Saul. And so Saul's first course of action was to loan the group $1,500 for a new amp. And a new contract was drawn up, but it was still the exact same agreement they had with the original owners of Fantasy Records, just with a new name at the bottom. It was a 7-year contract that called for John to deliver 12 master recordings for each of the first and second year, as well as then 24 recordings for every year following. And it was a total of 7-year contract. So he had to do 12 songs in year 1, 12 songs year 2, and then 24 every year after. And the label also had the right to request an additional 10 masters per year. So basically they were under contract for like 180 songs over 7 years, which is a really shitty contract. And but Saul said this is just like the contracts that new bands get, and they can just rip that contract up and we'll do a new one if they get big enough. Of course, the 22-year-old rock star wannabes signed the contract with full faith in Saul.
Yeah, I'm reading through this. So first of all, 7 years is way too long for a first contract. Second of all, that's way too many songs, probably. Mm-hmm. Usually it's an album. You might do a 1 or 2 album contract, and that'll have some sort of timeline to it, but that depends.
Yeah,
you always want to make sure there's an exit clause.
Yep.
So which
there
wasn't. This is nuts. Now they're not lawyers. I get it. I guess. Well, there was a lawyer in the family.
Well,
so
that was an issue that I'll talk about it now. I put it in the story for later, but I'll talk about it now since it's pretty relevant. John, in an interview, said that at the time when they got that contract, they gave it to Stu and said, "Stu, can you have your dad look over this and make sure it's good?" Well, about like a week later, they showed up and they were playing showed up to a gig, and they were like, "Stu, so what'd he say?" And Stu just kind of like nonchalantly was like, it's good to sign, and so they all signed it. And like years later now, with all the issues of it, John says that the only person in the world who truly knows if his dad actually looked at that contract is Stu himself. So it sounds very much like Stu didn't send it to his dad or have him look at it and just kind of lazily was like, it's like any lawyer would have picked up on that saying it's bad. But John didn't want to directly call him out in the interview. So he just said, only Stu knows the truth, is how he worded it. So obviously Stu did not have his dad look over the contract, because it might be one of the worst signed ever in rock and roll history, as we'll find out.
I think Elvis's was actually pretty bad too. I don't remember what his was, but I do remember his manager took 50%.
Yeah, that one was real bad. I don't
50%.
even think
most managers will take 10 or 15, maybe 20.
Yeah, the band got like 10%. total of like everything.
Yeah,
And then they wanted
2.5% each.
Yeah, and then they wanted to like make it up to him that they weren't going to get much money from that. So then they did like they tried to offer him a percentage of the actual record company, I think. But John was just like really his biggest thing is he wanted to own the masters, but it just wasn't going to be possible. Especially as a new band, you really can't get a contract owning your masters right off the start.
No, that's the one piece of leverage you have. So if you want to keep that, it's like you're not going to get a deal probably.
Yeah,
and it's fine. Just go on without a deal.
Yeah, and they did. They signed this contract and went with it, even though it was bad. So
yeah, well, hey, they did all right. You live and learn. Yep. So the group wanted to record the single Porterville under the new management. And they agreed, but Saul had a request. They had to get rid of the name the Gollywogs. So already Saul's talking some sense.
Yep.
So the band put together a list of potential names. You ready for this?
Yep.
Hardwood. That's a no. Gossamer Wump. Somehow worse than Gollywogs. Whiskey Rebellion. Not bad, but sounds a little...
I was like, I think
sounds a little tribal tattoo rock.
Yeah.
Sounds a little bit like you ride a motorcycle professionally for that one. Creedence Newble and the Ruby.
Yeah, so what it was, Creedence Newble.
Sounds like a kid's movie.
Creedence Newble, it was Tom's neighbor from South Africa. And so he wanted to do
sounds like a children's movie.
He wanted to do an off-ball name.
Well, he did it. Deep Bottle Blue.
And then
none of these hit me.
Blue. None of those hitting.
So they felt like none of the names truly captured their sound. So John liked the name of Tom's neighbor in Creedence and held on to that, as we know. Then one night, John was watching TV with his wife and son, saw a commercial for Olympia beer. The brand was relentlessly focusing on the natural water used from the Northwest. So John thought, why does a band name even have to mean anything? Like, what does Moby Grape even mean? I've always said this.
Yeah, I know. That's another thing that I see you in common.
So Creedence Clearwater Revival was brought to the band the next day, and it was perfect. Everybody agreed. So the band recorded the singles Porterville and Call It Pretending, which both failed to chart. And they followed this with a 9-minute-long cover song, Susie Q. I'm trying to remember who that one was by. Was that...
There were a couple versions.
Screamin' Jay Hawkins?
Yes, that was the original. Yep.
They mainly covered it to allow John the freedom to go crazy with his guitar solos, but this song would end up being the biggest single on their debut album. So there we go. It's like the Black Crowes kind of there.
Yep. Oh,
hard to handle, etc.
Side thing, I was on the plane flying back and I saw a little, I don't know if it was a documentary or just a live performance, but it was two of the Black Crowes and I took a picture of it because I want to watch it. I haven't gotten to it yet.
Nice.
But I was like, oh, this will be interesting. I bet Dallas and I will want to watch this.
Yeah, probably Chris and Rich, huh? Acoustic or something.
Maybe. But I was like, huh, that's cool. It was what I noticed when I was watching that Santana documentary.
Oh,
but anyways, back to CCR's debut album called Creedence Clearwater Revival. It was released in July of 1968. And the album entered the Billboard 200 at number 52. And the lead single was Susie Q, which charted at number 11 on the Billboard 100. And
in 1968, there probably weren't 200 albums. It's 52 because it was the 52nd album.
Yeah, I was going to say, what does even the back 100 look like?
I mean, I'm joking, but also I'm kind of not joking.
Right. But the other single from the album was another cover, I Put a Spell on You. And that cover landed on the Billboard 100 at number 80. And
nice.
The album has been certified platinum, so that's good. I think as of like 1990 or something like that. They included both of their Gollywog singles on the album as well, Porterville and Walk on the Water. And this album, more specifically their cover of Susie Q, started earning them a lot of local attention. And they were starting to land bigger shows and festivals that had bands like the Grateful Dead and even their heroes Booker T and the MGs. And quick side note about the Grateful Dead, I was telling you this along my research. So there was one time where the band went to see them play and, you know, acid and LSD were big time drugs, especially with the, you know, Summer Love, all this era in California and at these shows. So they went to see the Grateful Dead, and they were actually in the crowd, not playing. And they said that the crowd dispersed very quickly, and the show was just pretty bad because all of the members of the Dead were just too strung out on acid to play their songs correctly, and the show was really abysmal. And so CCR made a vow right then and there in the audience and said, we're not playing our music under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And they didn't. So that was a decision that stayed with them. And in fact, when they would go to some of the studios to record, they always said there was always 3 things on set: cigarettes, black coffee, and root beer. And that was it, which was so unlike any band at that time. And they would, of course, after shows do a little smoking and drinking. That was pretty normal, but never before they played, and never, ever, ever in the studio, which is extremely impressive to see a band from the late 60s show this kind of dedication to their craft, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm just thinking cigarettes, black coffee, and root beer. Imagine giving one of them a hug and talking to them up close and just how bad they smell.
Yeah. Right.
I see a lot of those pictures, like, in the studio in the 60s, 70s and stuff, and I'm just like, nobody's talking about how bad this must have smelled.
Dude, Doug does later. You'll see. It's
really?
Funny. Yeah, he doesn't smoke cigarettes. And so there's a funny story that'll come up in the future about that. But anyways,
Nice.
So the album artwork they used for their first 2 were actually just taken in the woods behind the Shire. They might have actually used 3 total album artworks from that one session. But the woods out there look really cool. But of course they couldn't.
Yeah, all that northern.
Yeah, the northern
stuff.
But of course they couldn't use it after they end up selling it in the future. But anyway, it's just a little background on that album artwork.
Nice, love that. So CCR had finally made it as a San Francisco band, and with the release of their first official album, they started doing a little more touring across the actual nation, getting out of their hometown a little bit. Their first show outside of the Bay Area was at the Fillmore East in New York City. Damn. God, it would have been nice to be a band then.
Right?
Oh, I don't know. We're playing some place called the Fillmore East. I don't know. I've never heard of it. I don't know. I don't even know how we got it. It's like, dude, what? People go their whole life trying to play that place.
I know.
Actually, I think it's closed now, but maybe I'm wrong on that. John also began working on new singles. One specifically felt like a continuation of Porterville. So John started developing a fictional, semi-autobiographical, surprised I nailed those words, upbringing in the southern swamps of Louisiana. So Born on the Bayou was one song of many written about this fictional South. And this would be the lead single from CCR's second album, Bayou Country. So that's where that swampy rock sound comes from.
Yep, that's what
it's all in his brain.
Yeah, they called it swamp rock. Yeah, he just developed it. And even like it talked about how he developed that accent and the way he says words, where he does the almost like the Brooklyn thing where you skip an R, like instead of working, it's working. That's how he pronounces words in the like singing, and it just adds to the effect.
Hate it.
Yep, it just adds to the effect for some reason. He doesn't even talk like that. He talks like a normal like California guy.
Nice.
So it's not as like valley accent, but you can definitely tell he's from California when he talks. But I just thought that was so interesting that he just adapted that sound, which is what made me think they were from Louisiana like forever. Because he sounds like he's from the South in the way he sings, but it was all just a portrayal. So that was really awesome. But anyways, before I jump into the second album, this was like an important turning point for the band. One night when the band was attempting to do some backing vocals for a song, John just couldn't be satisfied with the results that night. And he sent the other 3 to dinner and said he would catch up. And he showed up about 45 minutes later and had re-recorded all the backing vocals himself. And he told the band that everybody needed to have a band role. And he essentially laid out that he would be writing their songs alone. All final sound decisions would go through him. And no other band member was to bring any music to the table. And that all backing vocals would be him recorded, going forward. And John's intent was to put the band on his back. He was scared that they were going to be a one and done with their hit Susie Q. And of course, like we talked about, his ambition and drive is just way further than the others. It hit him way harder. So he wanted that longevity and knew that like his songs and his writing could make a future for them. They just needed to let him lead and kind of just follow along. I don't know if he was that good at, explaining it like this, but basically, unfortunately, this ultimately planted the first seeds of discourse that would later tear the band apart. Doug saw this as John attempting to establish power over the group. Tom was jealous that his little brother was now running the band and, leading his musical career. And then Stu was the only one that really understood, why John took this route. He had always noticed that, John came from less and that pushed him more than the others. And so he knew it was kind of coming out of a place of like fear of that the band would fail, but he still wasn't the happiest about John's approach. So now that I laid that groundwork for the uneasiness, we can go forward. I know you and I had a conversation about this, that every band needs a leader to some degree, or it'll hinder your success quite a bit. And
yeah, there's that old saying, no good art is made by committee, or art by committee. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
It's like if you get a group of people and everybody gets to equally create a piece of art, it's usually dog shit. Like you need like one singular vision and then support for that vision. That's typically what makes the best end product. Now, whether you want to argue if the guy leading the charge is a dick or not is a different conversation. But usually, historically, that's how the best stuff has been made.
Yeah.
Of course, there's exceptions to everything, but that's the art by committee thing.
Yeah, my guess is that, and John also talked about it, that he hated that the Beatles were an influence at this time because, the Beatles had it so that all of them were songwriters, apart from like Ringo, but he still wrote some songs, occasionally. But all of them were songwriters and all of their songs would be put onto their albums. So it kind of laid out this vision for all these other bands where the drummers and bass players and stuff are like, well, the Beatles are writing, like everyone writes songs there, so why can't we? And so that kind of created this thing. But then again, like just because you play an instrument, no offense, doesn't mean you can write a song. So, but John had proven that he could write songs that were hits. Like that was just
and sometimes you can write. Sometimes that works the other way too. You can write a song. You could be great at writing songs and barely play an instrument. Like,
true. Yeah. So
like you don't have to be a virtuoso to write killer songs.
Yeah, this episode
Taylor Swift is a great example. She writes so many hit songs, and she's not like a shredder. She's just a good strummer. Whatever, strum a few chords. Use the same chords every song. Who cares? It's about the songwriting and the story.
Yep. So many different ways to attack music. But anyways, now that we got this, all these angry seeds planted in everybody, we'll talk about Bayou Country.
Let's talk about the second album. Yeah, so Bayou Country was released in January of 1969. And this time their album was able to peak at number 7 on the Billboard 200. So that's much better. This album has since been certified double platinum. The lead single from the album was Born on the Bayou, which peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 100. The second single from the album was Proud Mary, which also hit number 2 on the Billboard 100. And the song would actually be one of their first to be covered just a few years later in 1971 by Ike and Tina Turner. Their version would win them a Grammy. It's a very famous version of that song. The final song from the album was not a single, but was the song they usually close their live sets with, which is Keep On Chooglin'. Please tell me I said that right.
You did. You nailed it.
That's something else. So the song had very few lyrics and was mainly just a long jam with many opportunities for John to solo to his heart's content. So maybe a little self-indulgent there, but...
Yeah, but it was like a good closer. It was a good jam song. They always ended their live sets with that one for quite a while. But really, I didn't know that Proud Mary was like... So during this time period, I knew CCR does a lot of cover songs. I didn't know that Proud Mary was theirs and that Ike and Tina covered it. I thought it was the other way around forever.
I did know that. Did I tell you my experience with playing that song live?
No, actually.
So I got hired to do a wedding, and I was just given a list of songs, just text. Nobody sent links or anything, just text. Here's Proud Mary, this one.
Yep.
So I go and I learn them all. I learned CCR's Proud Mary. I had never heard of or had no idea about Tina Turner's version.
So different.
So when they start playing the song, I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? Like we are playing this, I mean, 40 BPM too slow.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, well, if this sounds terrible, but if this is what they want to do, we'll do it. So I'm sludging along. And then, as you know, the song kicks up 80 BPM in the middle of it. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on?
Yep.
So I'm following along. And at that point, I realized, like, oh, I see what we're doing here. So then I was on board from then. But I was like, I had no idea that was coming. I'm ready to just start the song like normal.
What's funny is the Tina Turner one doesn't really become recognizable until the do 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 part at the end. Like the whole beginning is just like you said, excruciatingly slow and kind of just like goes nowhere. And then like halfway, it's just like
it's cool.
Bam, and it's good.
Once I knew what it was cool. But being blindsided by it, I was like, what is going on? Am I being pranked? Like,
yeah, if you're just gonna, for anybody out there, if you're just gonna put the song, you know, like if it has covers, you gotta be specific. Because if you tell me Proud Mary, I'm gonna instantly only assume CCR's version. You're gonna have to make a note to say that it's Tina Turner's version. You know what I mean?
So
that was just bad communication to you. Oh no.
So me and my bass player now, Rasan, we both got hired to fill in for an 80s tribute band. Not 80s, it was classic rock. So it was like the set list was like More Than a Feeling, Foreplay Long Time, you know, some Eagles, some this, some that, just old rock. You know, I don't even remember what a lot of them were. Working for the Weekend, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And on the text list, again, I see Drive. And I'm like, okay, Drive's by Incubus.
Yep.
It's like that one stands out to me as being not really in the genre of all these other songs. Like there's, 25 songs, they're all one way, and then this one's very different. I was like, whatever, I'll learn it. I've played it before. So learn Drive. Whatever tomorrow, that song.
Yep.
So I'm ready to play it. We're on stage. It's coming up. Here we go. Count it in. I have my fingers on the chords. He's counting it in. I'm about to hit start. And thankfully, this band was using backing tracks for like keyboards and stuff like that. So in my ears, right as I'm about to start, I mean, a millisecond apart, I hear these like keyboard pads start right when I'm supposed to start. So I freeze and I go, that's not the key I'm going to be in. That's not anything like what I'm thinking it's going to be. And on stage, Rasan and I glanced at each other like, oh no, we learned the wrong song. And that's when I learned that the Cars have a song called Drive, and that's the one I should have learned. On stage. Playing it. So Rasan and I quickly figure out it's in, I think, B minor. And so we just kind of spin the song like really carefully playing in B minor. Like,
yeah.
Like, I don't know what chord's coming next. I don't know if there's any sudden changes. I'm just going to kind of noodle around in this space.
You're playing.
Do what I do what I call everything on guitar. Yeah, I was the only guitarist.
Oh, you're the only guitar.
So,
damn.
Yeah. So
nothing to hide
when I get
behind.
in those situations, I do what I call Princing, which is where I'll just find one note that works and I'll just go chunk 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 chunk, just the one note.
I mean, it works.
Prince does that in a ton of songs, and it always sounds awesome. So it's like you kind of just find one note, play around with it a little bit. Anyway, that's a funny little sidebar about learning the wrong song.
Man, that'd be so nerve-wracking. But
there's been several times on stage where I'm playing a song and I lean over to the guy next to me and I'm like, what song is this? That's happened to me probably 20 times.
It's my first time playing it.
I've never heard this in my life. This one's kind of cool. What is this one?
That's hilarious. Yeah. Anyways, I was going to get back to that story's coming up. I was going to tell you about Doug. But anyways, Doug and Stu decided to sell the Shire when Doug got married and he moved out. So Stu is now the only band member who is unmarried at this time, and the Shire was gone. So the band needed a new rehearsal space, and Doug had a little shed in the back of his house, in the house he was renting, and that was going to have to do. And the space was very small and barely able to fit Doug's drums. And Doug was the only one who didn't smoke cigarettes out of the group. So basically just like rehearsal times were just three guys constantly chain smoking and like putting their cigarettes down in between songs to work on stuff. And one day Doug, just out of a rage, just left the shed and said, "It's a goddamn factory," and stormed out of the shed because he was like, the working conditions, I just can't handle it. The band what was funny is the band just all looked at him and just laughed and ignored him, continued to smoke cigarettes, like whatever.
That's really funny.
Deal with it. But anyways, the next day he showed back up to band practice, and the band had put a sign on the door, called it The Factory.
Nice.
So that's what the shed would be called, the factory from there forward.
It's as good a name as any. So throughout all this time, they continued to practice daily, which is another impressive feat for a band that had now 2 somewhat successful albums. And John was always after perfection every time they played. So they continued the same pattern as before. Release 2 singles, follow with an album. So their third album was Green River, which was released in August of 69. So hold on. The other one was released in January of 69. So they're moving fast.
Oh, yeah.
They're moving really fast. So the album would peak at the top of the Billboard 200, their first #1 album. That's insane. Lead single from this album was Bad Moon Rising, which continued their streak of #2s on the Billboard 100. And this song would also mark their first #1 song in the UK. So they didn't have to dress like bozos to make it happen. And the other single, Lottie, did not see the same success on the charts. So, I mean, everybody knows all these CCR hits. I don't think we really need to go too much into them. But yeah, obviously Bad Moon Rising, killer song.
Yep. Yeah, and then they also, I know you said the outfits. When they got their name changed, they also were allowed to drop the outfits, by the way. those did not have to endure.
Allowed to.
Yeah, allowed to.
It's funny.
So anyways, the band actually followed this album by playing the famous 1969 Woodstock Festival. And a lot of people don't even know that CCR was one of the headliners at Woodstock. Literally one of the bigger bands there. And they went on around midnight on Saturday, I believe, right after the Grateful Dead played. And they claimed that the Dead ruined the vibe and nearly put the whole crowd to sleep. And by the time CCR was on stage, they said the audience was half asleep, half strung out on drugs, and just covered in mud. And so John was not a big fan of the performance because the crowd energy was bad. And so ultimately, they said no to any footage of them being used in the Woodstock documentary. And unfortunately, that same documentary gave Jimi Hendrix and Carlos Santana like just this complete, elevator to fame, I guess, elevator to the top. And so it was always kind of like speculated, like, man, if CCR had their footage had been shown, they could have been even bigger than they were. But
I don't know. I mean, they already had a #1 album. Like that's, there's no #0. Like that's it. You did it. Like,
right. That's what I'm thinking. It doesn't really matter.
You're at the top.
Now,
and also, we were talking about this a little bit before, but like that this decision could go 2 ways, and only John knows, I guess, unless you said some of it's come out a little bit. But if it was actually truly a bad performance, then it's a smart idea to keep it out.
Yeah.
But more than likely, it's his perfectionist attitude and tendencies that's coloring an otherwise fine performance. Nothing wrong with the performance itself. He just didn't feel that good about it. In which case, that decision probably did hurt their career. Yeah. So, it really just depends on if the show was actually bad or if it was just feeling bad.
What it sounded like they played perfect, because the way they laid it out was because of how well practiced CCR is. Their show itself doesn't sound different. It sounds the exact performed like. So they cross their T's, dot their I's every time when they play. And so they actually talked about a lot of the, what was it? Roger Daltrey? Is that his name? Daltrey, the singer for The Who? Yeah. So he was there, and that was like his favorite band to watch as another. It seemed like CCR, like as a performer, was more so impressive to the other bands that were there than the crowd. But mainly because, like I said, they went on in the middle of the night with a bunch of people strung out on acid. So the crowd wasn't super receptive, but from the reviews that the other bands there, like The Who and the Dead and whatnot, all said that CCR was just like absolutely electrifying, like captivating. Like they said they were so good. They've never seen a band that's just so close to perfection and like perfectionists. So it sounds like awesome. The performance was absolutely flawless, but John did not like that the crowd energy wasn't reciprocal. So he said it was a bad performance. So that was where it came out to be.
If that's taking all this is true from the people that were there at the time, it sounds like it would have been a good decision to leave it on and just forego that perfectionist attitude in that moment. But hey,
I think so too. But I was like, it all worked out, and they did get their music included in the 1994 commemorative box set, Woodstock 3 Days of Peace and Music. So that was like a 4-disc thing, and it did include some of their music. So, okay, but still to this day, like not many people know. And then one thing I went on a tangent for, you have CCR, this big band that's all, clean, not on drugs and whatnot. And then you have Carlos Santana, which I watched that documentary on him. Santana hadn't even released an album to this point and was just like kind of lucked into his way onto stages playing guitar. And he played Woodstock in the middle of an acid trip because I think it was Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead gave him some acid and was like, oh, you'll be on your way down by the time you play, because he had like 6 hours to go. And then apparently he took it, and like 30 minutes later, they're like, all right, Santana to the stage. Then you get Santana up there, and it was so funny watching. He said his guitar was a snake that was trying to slither away from him. And so like you see him on stage and he's making funny faces and doing a lot of weird movement. And then he said he was just trying to play his solo and not let his guitar get away from him. But I just think it's hilarious. You have like this hardworking straight edge band, and then they of course opt out of being shown on Woodstock. And then you have this other guy who's almost a nobody. Like I say almost a nobody because he had no album by his name or anything, and just almost every show he had a different lineup of people. And Santana gets up there, plays like crazy, stoned on acid and stuff, and then just becomes this huge star because of that performance. Like him and Jimmy got their big, claim to fame because of Woodstock, in my opinion, like that coverage and stuff.
Oh yeah.
But man, it was just like so not fair. But anyways,
crazy.
After Woodstock, there was a show in Minneapolis where John decided that the band no longer plays encores, and he claimed they weren't special if they played them every night, but the band would never play another encore again. And
what is your view on the encore?
So I like the encore sometimes. I don't know, because I was just explaining this. I'm the guy that will leave a show like 1 or 2 songs early because I'll beat the crowd. Like that's just me. So the encore is like the perfect time for me to make my escape. So I don't typically listen to a whole lot of encores, and I'm fine with them not playing it. But the way they went about doing it was like, they just stopped doing them, and like the crowds and stuff would just be getting extremely rowdy, begging for an encore for like 20 to 30 minutes. And it ended up being a thing in one of their London shows. I'll talk about that in the future. That caused them to not meet some people that wanted to meet them. But I don't know, because like it was John's decision to not do an encore, and Doug really wanted to play encores. And so it was just another thing, just another stake in the heart of the band, What is your opinion on encores?
So I'm like you, if I'm at the show and the band goes away, I'm like, all right, I'm out. Let's go. Like we'll start walking, and then the band kind of wanders back on stage and starts playing another song. If I'm more often than not, I'm going to keep walking out and kind of enjoy it as I'm walking out.
Yep.
And then I'm going to feel really good beating the traffic and not feel like I missed anything. Now, if it's one of my favorite bands or I'm really excited about, like, I'll obviously stay the whole time. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
But if I'm playing, I can't imagine not doing an encore if people are screaming for it.
That was the part that killed me.
That's got to be like, I've had it happen a few times, and it's always like, well, we better go play another one. Like, this is awesome. Like,
yeah, and that's kind of like that big discourse was Doug. Like the very first time John said we're not doing an encore, Doug was dying because the crowd was just out there screaming their names, and he just had to sit there and listen to the screaming for like 20 minutes as it slowly subsided and people started to realize no encore and they were leaving.
You start to get, it's a weird, like slow realization, disappointment feeling when that happens too.
Yeah, so
we've dealt with that kind of stuff before, and it's also like really annoying. Like to me, like the fans are there paying for you. Like I'm going to give them everything I got within reason,
Yeah, they were just really famous for playing a 55-minute show on the dot, no minutes longer. After
Jesus,
that, like
that's
around
really short.
No, I know, they just their hits. So like, and you have to go back and look. Their songs are like 2 to 3 minutes long. They're not.
Yeah, they're short songs
ones.
for sure.
Yeah,
and their albums are short too. But I'm thinking like, and I guess at the time it's different. Like they don't tour and stuff anymore, so I get it. But to me, if I'm the band, like, and I'm going out on a tour, like for tour A, we'll have one show. For tour B, it's going to be a different show.
Mhm.
Like, we're going to change something as we're not just going to do the same thing every time. Like, that's just going to get, especially if they're practicing the same thing every day. Like, I can't imagine how they're having any fun with it, you know?
Yeah. And
It's
that was
like
one of
at
the
that
things.
point, you're just like a robot, like spitting out the music. Like, here it is, perfect. Next song, perfect. Next song, you know. It's like
That was like
what am
one
I
of the
watching right
issues
now?
is the band was like, John gave them the opportunity to do, their backing vocals and to show that the sound they brought during live performances, but everything through the studio is really under John's thumb. But this no encore thing was just like I said, just another like huge point of discourse that affected the band.
Dude.
So
The opposite of this, I saw Guns N' Roses last year, sometime about a year ago, maybe August-ish, and they they play like 3.5 hours, so we're already like 3 hours in the show, and they go off, and it's time for the encore. Everybody's cheering. They come back on. I'm like, all right, they're probably just gonna play Paradise City, and we'll all go home. Like, it's late. I'm tired. I've been punished with music in the face for 3 hours at that volume. It's a lot. Dude, they come out and I hear the heartbeat for Coma start, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And they play all 10 minutes of Coma.
jeez.
And then they do Patience, and then they do Paradise City. It was like a 3 or 4 song encore. There might have been a 4th.
Goodness.
But as soon as I heard Coma, I was like, dear God. Like, the longest song they've ever done.
That one.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Encore. Yeah.
It was really cool to see that song. I love that song. And then they used to not play it ever. Now they've started doing it in recent years.
So, anyways, the band followed their disappointing Woodstock festival by honing in on the material that would make up the band's 4th studio album, Willie and the Poor Boys, which would release
That's a
in
better
October.
band name than a lot of theirs.
Which came out in October 1969. That's actually so Willie and the Poor Boys is like a fictional band that they came up with.
I love it.
And the cover actually depicts them playing the instruments of Willie and the Poor Boys. So you have John playing harmonica. I think Stu is on, God, I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's like a washboard, literally like a washboard thing. And then another one's on like Jug is on like one of the seat drums that you just tap on. And then it's just taken on a street corner, and a couple kids had walked up and were in the frame. It's a really cool album cover. But so Willie and the Poor Boys was like a portrayal at, some fictional band of them. But anyways, Willie and the Poor Boy would peak at number 3 on the Billboard 200. So still moving on up. And the album had 2 singles.
Well, this is moving down now. No?
Moving down. That's right. Their last one was number 1. So number 3, not too bad. The album had 2 singles.
Yeah.
On the to lead the way in normal CCR fashion. The first was Down on the Corner, which peaked at number 3 on the Billboard 100. And the second single was Fortunate Son, which also peaked at number 3.
Love it.
Fortunate Son ended up becoming like the anti-war anthem for Vietnam,
right? Yeah,
or like around the country. But the funny thing is about this song is it's not even about war. It's literally about the differences in the working class. But it just absolutely caught on to everyone in the nation because a couple of lines applied to the war. And then it especially became a huge hit with the troops actually overseas. So just like you see in like, I know Forrest Gump is like the famous one I hear, Fortunate Son, when they're rolling into Vietnam, but they actually were playing
helicopter stuff. Yeah.
They were actually playing that song.
In a bunch of movies.
Yeah. They were actually playing that song at that time in Vietnam though. So CCR was like one of those bands that the soldiers really enjoyed listening to. But I'd say that that's been their biggest song to date, especially in modern pop culture. Like you said, it's in so many movies and things. That's got to be their number 1 for royalties, I'd say. But that song now just kind of embodies the entire Vietnam era. And Willie and the Poor Boys would achieve double platinum, so pretty good on that one. And
love it. And they followed up their album with an appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. So there we go. Remember when all the coworkers were mocking, saying, we'll see you on the Ed Sullivan Show? Now they can.
Yep.
Sweet justice.
Now they do.
Achieved it about 18 months since leaving his job. God, what?
Right?
What?
Because he left his job and put his savings into the band. And now look, it worked out.
You know how many people did that and it didn't work?
Oh, I know, right? What a bold
so
move.
CCR played Down on the Corner and Fortunate Son on the show. And both performances are on YouTube. And as we suspected, the band is tight.
Dude, yeah, they're solid.
Okay, here's a question for you. people say this a lot. That band's super tight, or oh, that performance was really tight. What's tight mean to you?
Tight to me means no mistakes. And I know that sounds weird, but I mean, you can go listen to a show and you're able to identify mistakes. You know what I mean? Like here and there, like a mishit,
if it's like a recording,
note, something like that.
It's a lot easier to hear. If you're in the room listening to it, it can be hard to hear in general, let alone hear any mistakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you're watching back on a board tape or something, it feels like everything's a mistake. You're like, oh my God.
I don't know.
This does not sound as good as I felt, you know?
I don't know. It's just something about the audio of a band that's tight. I don't know. It's just like you can tell they play with each other all the time on the regular, and they have like their sound down packed. Like they're going to hit their instruments and never make a mistake on their music, basically, is kind of how I feel. Whereas like, I don't know if I could put it in description, but a band like the Grateful Dead is the farthest thing from a tight band. If that makes sense.
Yeah, jamming.
You know
just
what
chilling,
I mean?
jamming.
Yeah, they're jamming. They're not playing the same shit every time they play. They're all doing random stuff that's different in the moment. Like, no, CCR comes in, they're going to play their songs basically exactly how you heard them on the record, maybe a little faster with a little more improvising, but overall, like, they were going to come and play their show the way it was meant to be played, and just like,
so very
they were
precise.
perfectionists. Yeah, man, they were precise. Yeah. There you go.
So 69 was a huge year for the band. 3 top 10 albums, 4 top 5 charting singles, and 3 other top 100 charting singles. So their albums are going multi-platinum, and they actually outsold the Beatles in the year 69. That's quite a feat.
Yeah. Like the biggest band of 1969.
That's pretty funny. They were trying to model themselves after the Beatles, and they just passed them.
Right. So in April of 1970, CCR they went to do their first international show, that one I was telling you about in London. And so this was right, a little after they decided to stop doing encores. And so they were at a show, and the crowd there specifically is like known for getting their encores and not leaving until they get them. And so because of that, this time, like, the crowd hung around for nearly an hour before finally dispersing. And because of that, Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, and George Harrison were all at the show to watch, and they wanted to come meet CCR in the dressing room. But because they didn't play an encore, the crowd, didn't leave and became rowdy. And so they couldn't get through the crowd to get back there. It would have been too dangerous. So they ended up not getting to meet any of those people. And that specific night was another one that made Doug especially angry at John for no encores.
Just because not meeting them.
Not even it didn't even have to do with that. They didn't even find out about those guys till way after. It was just
till
that
later, yeah.
The crowd, like I said, they waited around for nearly an hour. It was like a crowd that, like I said, they always get their encore. Like, so they were going crazy out there. And he was just like, come on, dude, we got to get out there and play. And just everyone sat around like, no, dude, we don't play encores. So
that's where some flexibility is needed. It's sometimes it's good to be rigid, and sometimes you gotta inject
that was the opportunity to play an encore.
Yeah. So the band released their 5th album in July of 1970. Cosmos Factory was their best performing album yet, topping the charts in 6 countries, including the Billboard 200. Is that their second #1 album?
Yes.
I think so, yeah.
Yep.
So the album would also be certified 4 times platinum, and it had 6 singles tied to it. They were released as double-sided singles. So let's crank through them. First double side, Who'll Stop the Rain and Travelin' Band. That hit number 2 on the Billboard 100. Second double side was Looking Out My Back Door, Long As I See the Light, or Long As I Can See the Light, sorry, which also peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 100. Long As I Can See the Light is one of my favorite songs by them, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I think it is you too.
Yep, definitely up there for me.
And the final double side was Up Around the Bend and Run Through the Jungle. So those both reached number 4 on the charts. Run Through the Jungle was another song about the workforce in America, like Fortunate Son, but the soldiers in Asia saw the word jungle and adopted it as another war song. doesn't take much.
Yeah.
Like he said something about a gun. War song.
He said run through the jungle. That's what we're doing. But
yep. That's what I'm done. I relate to this so much. This album actually showed up in the Rolling Stone top 500 album list that we went through. And this album would end up going down in history as being their best seller So there you go. Cosmos Factory. The
I think
pinnacle, peak CCR.
Actually miswrote. So Fortunate Son was Workforce. This one, it wasn't Workforce. It was the lack. I think it was like the lax gun laws or something in America.
Oh, okay.
And so like
Gotcha.
Run Through the Jungle just joked about like the amount of people that had unregistered guns on the street. You know, like just the streets of America are a jungle. But then the soldiers over there were like, "Run through the jungle." I'm actually doing that. This is our song. This is for us.
Say no more.
Yeah. Just so funny how songs get misinterpreted with ease. Like takes nothing. But anyways, the group followed with their sixth studio album, Pendulum, after Cosmos Factory, which they got the name Cosmos Factory because Cosmo is Doug's nickname. Doug Cosmo Clifford. And he got that from
Cosmos
college.
Factory, the rehearsal spot.
Yep, Cosmos Factory is the shed.
I love that.
Right? So they followed this album with their sixth studio album. Just a busy band, always recording.
Jeez. Doobie Brothers and these guys. Something about that San Francisco water, huh?
Yeah. So they released Pendulum on December 9th, 1970. And
my birthday.
Yep, on your birthday. And their first album.
I wasn't born yet, but it wasn't my birthday yet.
It was actually their first album to not include a single cover song. The album peaked at number 5 on the Billboard 200, and the lead single from this album was "Have You Ever Seen the Rain," which hit number 8 on the charts. And "Have You Ever Seen the Rain" is actually paying homage to Booker T and the MGs, who the band had actually grown close to. Remember, they were their idols, and then they ended up
awesome.
They met them at one point at a recording studio and got to jam with them and basically have that like sit down and just talk about all the music and the inspiration. It was a really great time for them.
So what's their, like, technically their biggest song? What would you say?
And probably just Fortunate Son if you're looking at money brought in.
Yeah, that's true. And then I was going to say, and then what would you say is their perceived greatest song? Because I was going to bring up "Have You Ever Seen the Rain" as their perceived biggest song. Because, dude, I can't tell you how many times I've just heard this song when I'm not seeking out this song in any way.
Yeah, that is true.
It is just everywhere. Like,
yeah, that one's big.
But that's why I was surprised to say it was number 8. Yeah, I was surprised to see it was number 8. I was like, dude, what?
Yeah, because it's towards their decline, I guess.
Yeah.
And the album actually had a second single called "Hey Tonight," which peaked at number 8 as well. They always peak the same because they always do like the double side. So they release their singles with A side, B side, which is why, for anybody wondering, you keep seeing these repeated same entries on the Billboard 100 because they both get logged in under the same like entry, which was really weird.
Dude, that would actually be kind of a fun thing to do these days in the streaming era. That'd be fun to release A side, B side.
An A side, B side.
Like every single's basically 2 songs.
Yeah.
More work, but that's cool.
It is more work, but yeah, it definitely relates to an older time.
Yeah.
So anyways, after this, we planted the seeds of discourse a little while back, if you remember. And well,
I remember.
Those seeds have fully grown into turmoil, jealousy, and conflict by this time. And the overwhelming perception was just that John was being too overbearing and controlling and preventing other members from expressing their creativity. And John had finally given in and told the band that they could start writing songs as a group, that, you know, they could go forward with a democratic approach, but the damage had already kind of been done, and John's older brother Tom just couldn't take it anymore, and he actually left the band in early 1971. And the group decided to just remain a trio instead of replacing Tom. And
yeah,
so even though the band decided to continue along with this new democratic approach, the issues continued. Stu and Doug were excited to start writing music, but at the same time, they were writing songs that just didn't have that CCR sound. And John, anytime John would try and help guide them in those songs to help make them sound more like their normal CCR stuff, they were extremely not receptive to it. So this process led to the release of their 7th and final album as a band, of course, without Tom.
So hold on, imagine the irony there when they want to input on the song and he says no and they get mad, and then they write a song and he wants to input on it and then they say no and get mad. Like,
Right.
It's like, all right, so you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
So CCR's final album, Mardi Gras, was released April 11th, 1972. This album was one of their worst performing albums, landing at number 12 on the Billboard 200. That's still pretty awesome.
Well,
Lead
I think
single
that's
was
just from the
Sweet
name.
Hitchhiker.
Yeah, that's just from.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. Landing at 12 and then probably plummeting from there. Lead single was Sweet Hitchhiker, which peaked at number 8. The follow-up single was Someday Never Comes. That's fun, which hit number 25. The album would be the only CCR album to not go platinum. That's kind of a sad I told you so for John Fogerty there.
Right. Yeah. So anyways,
Were
following
they
the
credited as writers? Were Stu and Doug credited as writers on this album? So this is the
Yeah.
first, like, kind of, it is kind of Democrat. Okay. So
Yep,
it's
this
just
was-
worse. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a worse. Yeah, because I
Just
don't know
worse
any of
CCR,
those songs. Yeah, that album was not the best. There's even one where I think Stu or Doug is singing, and not even John.
Oh, God.
I think it was a Stu song. Yeah, that's why it's like they fully like. This is what John had been warning. That I mean, because like John wrote all their big hits, man. Just like it's okay to be along for the ride. You don't have to write the music. Like being a member in the band, in my opinion,
Just
is still
be
cool
in
enough.
one of the biggest bands.
dude.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah. So, anyways, following the album and
Creed.
the horrible writing process that took place, John was completely at odds with his band. They were at this realization where, you know, they were also locked into one of the worst record deals, and there was that issue going on. Saul Zantz had no intentions of ripping up that old contract like he promised. And
Why would he?
Stu blamed John for the bad contract. But at the same time, remember, Stu had the opportunity to show his dad the contract and didn't. Or at least we think he didn't. So how can you even go and blame John when your dad was a lawyer and he asked you, your lawyer dad, to look over the contract so they could sign it? Like,
That's,
that is just, that one made me really mad.
That's frustrating for sure. And Stu and Doug and Tom are all mad at John for being controlling, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like the way it's described here, and it does seem like there were some controlling aspects, like the no encore thing. But
Yeah.
it seems like he was just saying, like, you know, guys, let's all play to our strengths here. Like, I'm really good at this part of the thing. You know, let me handle this part. This is where I shine. You know, you guys do other parts. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I don't need any help here. I got this part under control. And that's tough conversations to have sometimes.
It is. And
But
so
I mean, obviously history remembers John as being right and all. That's really hard to argue
right.
with that, you know?
Yeah. So even with this discourse, they were able to at least do a little tour following this album before they broke up. I think it was like 20 shows or something. And unfortunately, because John was the one that did all the writing for CCR, Fantasy Records was fine with the other three members leaving, but they held all those contract obligations to John. All those 180 songs in 7 years, you know, were all on John's shoulders. So
Because they know he can do it, obviously.
Yep. So they would continue to hold that contract over his head until somebody else bought him out of that contract in 1975. And then he had to do a solo album under that other label. I can't remember exactly who it was, but later on, also the other three members. So they always had this agreement that, you know, all four members would have to vote yes to something as far as royalties and stuff. And behind John's back, all three of the other members sold their voting rights of the band to Saul while John was in a lawsuit with Saul. So basically everybody in the band kind of stabbed John in the back. And that discourse has never really been addressed since. I do think that John has kind of forgiven them in a way, because he said that he'd be open to playing with them, but the other two have no interest in playing with John. So I don't think that'll ever happen again. But anyways,
Dang, dude, it sucks. It sucks to hear that, because that immediately makes me lose pretty much all respect for the people that did that.
right.
Like there's some things like I think you just don't do as just being a good person, especially to your brother, even if you're mad at him. Like, even if you're mad and fighting and stuff, like, you'd still be like, nah, dude, like, I'm not doing that to him. Even if I do think he's the biggest dick in the world, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if Tom sold his or what happened, or if Saul naturally got access to them when he died. So a little bit after, so John started a new band called the Blue Ridge Rangers after CCR, and then Stu and Doug started a group called Creedence Clearwater Revisited, and then Tom.
That says a lot right there.
Tom went and did a solo career through the 70s, and the group wouldn't play ever again until I think they played at Tom's wedding in 1980. And didn't even play at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 93. Now, Tom died in 1990, and so he wasn't even able to attend the, Hall of Fame induction. But I also don't know if he had already sold his voting rights before then, or if Saul was able to acquire them because of Tom's death. So I'm not 100% sure if that happened, but I know Tom and John never made up before Tom died. So that never happened, which is really sad.
That's got to suck. Yeah, that's got to be a black cloud that hangs over you,
Yep. And
because after a while, all this stuff happened in the 60s, 70s. You're in 2024, you're kind of sitting in your recliner reading a book, and you just look up and you're like, that was all unnecessary, dude. We didn't need to have any of those problems.
Right. John didn't even play
these years later
single CCR song until 87. Also, he refused to play anything Creedence Clearwater Revival until a show in 1987 when Bob Dylan, George Harrison, and Bruce Springsteen, he was playing with all them at the show, and they were like, dude, you have to bust out a CCR song. Come on. And so he finally did, and now he'll play some. But as far as, like I was saying, there's no hope at a reunion show. John has multiple times said he's, open to talking to the band, Stu and Doug. But Stu and Doug said that ship has long sailed, and now they just have their Creedence Clearwater Revisited, where they just keep trying to get singers that sound like John, but aren't John. So it's kind of funny that after all their fighting back of we want to write songs also, now they just crawl back to the same songs that John wrote and then also they act like they didn't do anything wrong. That's the worst part is Doug and Stu are assholes to this day about the whole situation, and John was the one who was really fucked over the most, and he's the coolest one about it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah,
that's really a frustrating story,
dude. I know it, and that's what I was telling you before. I love the story, but I hate the ending.
There's no justice, no good ending there. It's just kind of well, all right, anyway, life goes on.
Yep. So if you had any hopes of seeing them, your only hope is to either go to a John Fogerty individual show where hopefully he plays some CCR, or you can go see, Doug and Stu and their revisited group and not get the vocals or the actual guy who wrote the music. So,
well, personally, I wouldn't want to support those two at this point.
Me either. Yeah, I wouldn't either.
So that's great. They were part of that history, but.
Dude, the worst
they
part,
made some really bad decisions, and the fact that they didn't kind of come clean or admit any wrongdoing or anything, it's that's not great.
I think Stu ended up saying he apologized for selling his voting rights, saying that he was just sick of people coming and asking him all the time, can we use your songs in this and that and that? And he was like, I just want the money. I don't care about the music, which is a shitty thing to say and doesn't absolve him at all.
Well, that's also kind of an FU to John at that point. He's basically saying well, I didn't write it. I don't care,
Yep. And he sold. That's what's so shitty.
He knows John did, it's just, there's layers to the badness. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a bad situation and it ends badly, but
yeah.
Oh, well. So now I guess it's time to do our ratings,
saddest ending,
baby.
Saddest, worst ending to an episode ever.
I know.
Just a bunch of people looking around I don't know what went wrong. It was so great, and then it's over. Anyway, see you next time.
Yeah.
All right, so as you know, as a listener to the show, we break our ratings down for every band, every act, every artist, every composer into 5 different categories. Those categories are creativity, replayability, cultural impact, emotional connection, and the nostalgia factor. So we basically go through and rate each of those out of 5, and then we come up with an average, and that's our rating for the band. I have a feeling today's going to be a good one, I think. So, Ashton, why don't you get us started off with what's your rating for Creedence Clearwater Revival in creativity out of 5?
So creativity, this one, I was really in between a 3 or a 4.
Dude, me too. I hate everyone thinks I just copy you, but we just
I know.
literally think the same a lot of times.
This is what happens.
I need to start saying it
I
first.
was like, I don't know how many people out there have a 20-year long friendship, but you start to think pretty similarly.
I was sitting here, I almost cut you off. Cut you off to be like between a 3 and a 4 for me, because every time it's like you say it, and then I'm like, I'll do that too. It's like, no, I genuinely was thinking this, like independently of what you thought.
Yeah, so like, I want to lean towards like the higher on the 4, because there's really not many, if any, sounds that sound like Creedence Clearwater Revival. They really took this great mixing pot of all of their inspirations coming from completely different areas, and they made this sound that was so unique to the area, the genre.
This brings me back to a conversation I think we had before, is how we're defining creativity. I think you're defining creativity as in CCR versus music. I think I'm defining creativity as CCR versus themselves as they evolve and grow.
Oh, like so where do they go with?
I think we're thinking of it in two different ways, which could end up with two different numbers. Because see, I was leaning towards a 3 myself, because I was thinking like, well, their first album isn't that much different from you know what I mean? That's kind of how I think. Like an AC/DC would be like a 1 or a 2. Like,
I see what you mean.
But then the way you're thinking of it, AC/DC would be like a 4 or 5, because no one does that. That's them. You know what I mean? And anyone that does is just an AC/DC close. So I don't know. We need to decide which way we want to think about it. There's not a right or wrong one. We just need to get on the same page there. What do you think?
I don't know, because I like creativity in the space and then creativity within. I like both.
Damn, are we talking about adding a whole new category right now?
It's possible, because
so it'd be like creativity, and then evolution would be the new one.
Evolution, yeah, I guess. Like, how has their sound changed from album 1 to final?
I like that it just made you a fraction in that.
Dude, it always does that. It's so weird. So
we just created. You heard it here first.
Evolution. So then I'm gonna hit him with
category.
I'm gonna hit him with. This is going to be so controversial after everything I said. I'm going to put a 3 on creativity, because yes, they came up with this new genre, but they kind of got famous just playing a lot of covers with slight variants. So a lot of people were like, a lot of the reviews of their music was like, they remind us what rock and roll is mixed into this newer sounding era. So I don't want to give them higher than a 3 specifically, but they also were pretty creative with how they developed their sound. And then as far as evolution, I'm probably at like a 2 out of 5. They don't change their sound a whole lot until the very last album, and then it's for the worst,
and it is just John's sound.
Yeah, like just John had a good system. He wrote great songs. They should have just rode with it. And yeah, it could have maybe evolved into something different, but within the scope of the band, probably a 2 out of 5 for evolution.
I was in the middle of hitting the 4 key on creativity, and then you said the sentence about the cover songs, and that swayed me, and I changed to 3. So I gave him a 3 out of creativity, just because of what you said there. It's if you're breaking into the industry on a bunch of cover songs, that's awesome. More power to you. But I think in my book, you're losing some points for creativity, and that's just how it is for me, I guess. Evolution, I also did it too for many of the same reasons. Replayability, though, I'm gonna give him a 5. I think.
Me too. I'm at a 5 on replayability. CCR's hits are just so good.
Put them on anytime, any place, and it's awesome. It's just how it is, you know.
Which is awesome.
All right, cultural impact.
Real quick, that was part of John's writing style. Is he wanted a song that everyone could listen to. That was like the main thing. He wanted one that like all walks of life could, and they even joke about how in some of their shows, you know, there's like military guys, you know, hippies, like, you know, people with jobs, homeless people, like drug addicts, straight edge people. It just was like their music and their songs like just embodied all of America, which was just, that's what you get, that replayability part. Cultural impact, this is going to be a hard one, because
I think
only 3 years to talk about, and
I think I'm going to go with, I want to go with a perfect half, a 2.5.
2.5?
I don't know. Can we do halves?
Yeah, I'm going to land at a 3. You could do 2.5s. It'll just, that'll be fine. Yeah, I'm gonna land right at a 3. They weren't big enough to hit the world internationally very much.
They weren't around long enough either. Like
and
you
they
said.
weren't around long enough. Yeah. Now, had they done the Woodstock, stuff, and then like the band not falling apart, this band could be one of the biggest ones we've ever known. You know what I mean? Like,
That's true. And they would have had to stick around longer, I think. And I think, they had that conversation so early on that they weren't long for the world.
yeah,
They were going to implode about that time, no matter what, I think.
I think so too.
Now, the way it went down could have been handled better, which would have made room for maybe a reunion. Imagine them coming back in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, whatever. But it went down bad. So,
True.
All right, we have emotional connection and nostalgia factor. I'm going to lead us off here.
Go for
I put
it.
emotional connection at a 4 out of 5 because a lot of CCR songs are part of being a musician and learning guitar and playing gigs. Can you learn this Fortunate Son real quick? That's the first time I learned any of their songs was because whoever I was playing with was like, you got to learn this one. You got to learn this one. So that's a big part of growing up as a musician. Nostalgia factor, I put a 3 out of 5 because, there's a little bit of nostalgia there, but not quite as much.
So I'm almost inverse of you. I've got a 3.5 on the emotional connection. Just because their songs really, because of, you see how they're misinterpreted and people can apply them to so many things. So it's emotionally, you can kind of just slot a CCR song to fit your life. So as far as like emotionally, you can get it to work. So I'm at like a 3.5 there. And then nostalgia, I'm at a 4 out of 5. This was definitely one of the earlier rock bands. I enjoyed the early rock and roll. I enjoyed their songs, and I remember listening to at least a bunch of their hits when I was young. It was nice to dive into some of the deep cuts going through their discography, and like I sent you a couple that I found that I was like, man, these are better than some of the hits in my opinion. They have some really long
stuff.
jammy songs. If you dive into their albums, they usually have one on every album that's like an 8 or 9 minute long just jam sesh that just has John slaying guitar solos. So it's really cool awesome to really dive in. So that
puts our totals, your totals at a 4.1 out of 5.
Ooh.
And I'm at a 3.9 out of 5. So you average our scores out. The Melomaniax score is a 4 out of 5.
Nice. That's a good score for those guys.
Good solid score. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up here?
No, this is actually one of my favorite episodes that we've done.
This was a good one. This was a good one. A good manageable amount of music, a manageable career to talk about. I think we're going to have some coming up that are not so manageable. And probably even multiple parters and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. So CCR in the books.
Done. All right. Well, as we wrap up here, just want to remind you guys, please like and subscribe on YouTube if that's where you're watching it. Follow us on socials. Hit us with those ratings and reviews. Check out the Patreon. All that good stuff. Until next time, this has been Melomaniax, and we'll see you in the next episode.